Hey, what's up folks, how's it going? This is Waj. Hope you guys are all doing well, and in this video we're going to be doing a side-by-side head-to-head comparison between the 2015 version of the MacBook Air 13.3-inch edition versus the all-new Surface Book that we just received. So we're going to take a look at the internal and external specifications, take a look at the design differences, and really determine which one has the most to offer for those of you guys that want a portable yet powerful PC. So if you're interested, let's get right into it. Now, in terms of form factor, you're going to notice in terms of dimensional differences that there's really not a big difference between these two computers. Both laptops are in the same vicinity in terms of size and overall footprint, but there is a difference in terms of thickness and certainly weight. If you take a look at the Surface Book, because it has that fulcrum hinge system, which allows you to transform the laptop into a tablet, as well as flip over the display and use the whole thing in more of a clipboard formation. But sadly, all this functionality does mean that the computer is actually quite a bit thicker than it really needs to be. It measures over 2.2 centimeters at its thickest point, versus the 13-inch Air is just under 1.7 centimeters in terms of its thickness, and in terms of weight, the Air is much lighter at 1.35 kilograms versus the Surface Book is pretty hefty at 1.57 kilograms. Now, in terms of the ports and connectivity options, both are pretty similar. They both have USB 3.0 connectivity as well as a place to put in your SD card. The MacBook has Thunderbolt 2 connectivity for fast data throughput as well as external monitoring. And you have mini DisplayPort connection to do the same job on the Surface Book. Now, interestingly, when it comes to the webcam space, the Surface Book actually has dual cameras, a rear-facing 8-megapixel camera that can do 1080p video, and we have a 5-megapixel front-facing camera, which is certainly a lot better than the quite dated 720p FaceTime camera we have on the MacBook Air. Now, in terms of the keyboard and trackpad options, both computers offer exceptional performance. They're very easy to type on, and they actually have a very similar design in terms of how much key travel you have, the actual size of the keycaps, and even the overall design, even though you're looking at an OS X keyboard compared to a Windows keyboard, is fairly similar. Furthermore, both keyboards are backlit, and they're both pretty even in terms of their light distribution, which is nice. Now, we have a fairly generous sized trackpad on the Surface Book, measures about 105 by 70 millimeters. So dimensionally, it's actually very similar to the one that we find on the Air, and they both have a mechanical clicking system because the current generation of MacBook Airs don't have the Force Touch trackpad at this point. But one thing I should mention, in terms of responsiveness, the Surface Book isn't quite as responsive and as quick as what I experienced on the MacBook Air. Now, that being said, the MacBooks are kind of industry leading in terms of their trackpads, and everyone has kind of since copied their design. And even though physically speaking the trackpad is very similar on the Surface Book, it's still not there in terms of the integration and just the overall experience you get compared to the MacBooks at this point. Now, moving forward, let's talk about the displays on both these two things. Now, one thing that the Surface Book is going to completely destroy the MacBook Air on is certainly its capabilities and specifications. It's basically a 13.5-inch display versus 13.3-inch on the Air, and in terms of resolution, you're looking at a whopping 3000 by 2000, giving a PPI count of about 267, versus we have 1440 by 900, a 16 by 10 aspect ratio display with a PPI count of about 127. So way lower resolution, and it's also a TN panel, so the viewing angles and overall color accuracy isn't as good as what we encounter on the touchscreen display on the Surface Book. Now, that being said, you also have to consider that the Surface Book is a more premium device. It costs almost 50% more than the base model of the MacBook Air, so it definitely comes with a hefty price tag, and you have to consider, is it worth that price tag when you take a look at both products side by side? Now, I do have to say that pretty much everyone can notice the difference between a high density display and a standard kind of HD display, and you'll notice in the text, you'll notice in the photos and the videos and all those things, and more things are moving towards high density display, so it makes sense to have this. But at the end of the day, I've been using the Air for years and years, and I still use it to this day, and I don't have a major complaint about its lack of sharpness or the fact that I can see the pixels that make up the display. And even though from a day-to-day standpoint people are generally not going to care, once you do move to a high density display and go back, you will start kind of being spoiled by all those pixels. Now moving on, let's talk about the internal specs on both these two computers. Now both are basically the entry level performance models. So you're looking at basically the 6th generation Intel Core i5 processors on the Surface Book. So we're using a i5 6300U, clocking about 2.4 gigahertz and it can turbo up to 3 gigahertz, versus the 2015 version of the MacBook Air uses the 5th generation Intel Core i5 processor, clocking about 1.6 gigahertz and it can turbo up to 2.7 gigahertz. In terms of RAM, we have 4 gigabytes on our Air and about 8 gigabytes on the Surface Book, and we're both using the integrated HD graphics that comes accompanied with the processors. Lastly, in terms of storage, both computers are actually using PCIe based SSD storage, so you're looking at 128 gigabytes on both models. Now with all those specs aside, let's actually talk about the actual performance differences between the two. So let's pull up Cinebench R15, which is going to specifically test our CPU performance, and here you can see the results. We get about 305 points on the Surface Book and about 259 points on the MacBook Air. So the Surface Book is certainly faster in this benchmark because of that higher clock speed. And when we took a look at the Geekbench 3 results, the single core and multi-core scores are again higher on the Surface Book, as you can see over here. Now moving on, one area that the Air still succeeds in by a huge margin is the sequential read and write performance of the internal storage. You're looking at about over 1.3 gigabytes per second in terms of the sequential read performance and over 630 megabytes per second in terms of sequential write. Now as you can see, in terms of the read performance, the Surface Book isn't completely bad. You're getting over 700 megabytes per second in terms of that, but in terms of the write performance, it's absolutely appalling at 157 megabytes per second. Now I've tried a whole bunch of different benchmarks. I've done some manual sequential read and write performance and I'm pretty much getting all the same results. Now if you do get the 256 gigabyte version or larger, you do get faster performance. Generally speaking, most people that own those models are at least getting twice of what I'm getting, or really you're still going to have a concern with the write performance of getting under 300 megabytes per second, where in reality it should be getting over 630. Now for years and years, the MacBook Air was the absolute king of battery performance. There was really nothing out there that can match it, and it's really not until now where we have a device that can really stand up to the MacBook Air. And in order to control all the variables, we just did a simple video playback test, and we made sure that the brightness was at 50%, the Wi-Fi was off, no applications running in the background, and basically just ran the test until both computers died. And it took a while, but basically here are the results over here. We got about 13 hours 41 minutes on the Air, and we got about 13 hours and 58 minutes on the Surface Book. So the Surface Book just edges out the Air in terms of battery performance. That's crazy impressive and a remarkable feat, but there's actually a little trick up the Surface Book's sleeve, and that's the fact that it actually has two battery compartments, one in the keyboard area and one in the display itself. Because the display can be used as a standalone tablet, you actually have extra battery, and that adds to your general battery performance when you're using the Surface Book as a laptop. But really on that, guys, that's really it. As you see, the Surface Book has definitely a lot to offer. It's certainly the higher performing model, more of a premium hardware inside compared to what we have on the current version of the MacBook Air. Certainly one of the biggest downside is that display. That's one thing that's holding it back from everything else in the market, but from a value standpoint, you are definitely saving a lot of money when you go with the Air compared to what you have to pay with the Surface Book, but you are getting quite a bit with the Surface Book. So definitely keep that in mind when you're making your decision. Hopefully this video gave you some sort of direction to go forward, and if you like this video, please give us a thumbs up. But really, other than that, we'll see you later.